So in the previous tutorial, we talked about how we transfer data from the watch to the cell phone and backwards. Now we're going to talk about how when that data gets transferred, for example, when we select these, we have actual interactions happening on the interface. So for example, we have these little circles that highlight depending on what is selected, so we know what questions are coming up in the flow. And also, for example, once thermal and light are selected, we get the thermal question and we get, noise, and we get the noise question, and there is a little thank you screen at the end. So we're going back to the area of the code we were at earlier. And we were talking before about this kind of PSOCKET connection and this inbox file processor. So if we now scroll up a little bit, what I have here is an array known as flow. So the default flow is called show thank you. And the flow is basically the views that come on the screen. So the default show thank you, if I click this button, only show thank you exists, which is your feedback has been received, is what's called show thank you. Now, if I select then, for example, these two questions, now I have two items in the flow plus show thank you, 3 items in this array. So how does that happen? Well, first of all, I have an array of all flows that has all the different types of questions that could possibly be asked. And I then have all the small icons. Now, this document.getElement by ID small thermal, basically we go into our GUI file under resources, and you can see here that there is small thermal, for example. This is this tiny little circle of size 6. There's an opacity of 0.2, basically meaning that it's, well, right now it's not. Let's unselect it. So there's an opacity of 0.2. And this particular location. And so I collect all of these into an array as well. And then down here, once I read the data, so I have the data which is saved as a thing called flow selector, I then want to map the flows, and I run this function down here called map flows. And flow selector comes in as an array. So just to show you what that looks like, if I select thermal, the flow selector is 0, right? It's the 0th item. If I select noise, we now have 0 and 2. If we get light in there, we've got 0, 2, and 1. It comes in the order that you click. So if we, for example, select all of them, we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, no, we have more here. 5, 6, for example. So this is the array known as a flow selector. So the items, it's like an array of indices. And this is the order it comes in, right? Thermal, light, noise, indoor, outdoor, office, mood, clothing. So what we do is, first of all, we set the flow. So once this function gets run, we just reset our flow to be nothing. So with nothing in the flow. We then map through our flow selector, if a flow selector exists. And for each indice, so each one of these numbers in the flow selector, we push the corresponding or flow index into our flow. And then at the very end, we also add the show thank you, just so we have the thank you message at the end as well. And this then sets our flow. And likewise with the small icons, in the same way that I set flow to the flow array to nothing at the start, I, per default, set all the icons. So I map through my array of small icons, and I set them all to 0.2. And then through these indices, based on what indexes it is, I then set the style and opacity, the opacity which is part of the style, to 1. So this is what the effect that you get when you kind of select these and these colors change up and down. And then once we have this flow selector, we then move through it. So we have, for example, well, I'm going to stop that there for now because I think the next part will take another wee while to explain. So in the next tutorial, we'll talk how then that selection or how those flows can then be converted into actual changes of screen.